Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
Hey, Katie. How you doing?
I am pretty good. It feels like a new time of year. It's a little cooler and things are quieting down with racing and we're recovering and it's all really good stuff.
It is really good stuff. I was just asking you offline, are things quieter for you? Because it's funny, I feel the same way. I feel like we're busy still. And there's still lots of insights coming in, but I also feel like this frenzy of Ironmans and this race and that race, and it's only August, but it just feels like things are just a little bit slower.
Yeah, I think people have made it through most of their A races. I mean, we have a little bit of people racing here and there, sprints and Olympics, and there's a handful of 70.3s that still exist. But in general, I think we're seeing that, the weather's getting cooler and everything's wrapping up, which I think we're ready for that. I don't know. I think a lot of my athletes are starting to feel like, wow, it's been a really long season. And I've certainly felt that as both an athlete and a coach. But it's a good thing. And it gets us excited to sort of enjoy just unstructured time and recovering and also get excited for what's happening next year, too.
And I hear you've been taking an off-season this year. Is that what the little birdies report?
Yes, I've been in my off-season era. And we've actually talked about this in a couple of episodes. But I thought maybe I could start off some of our coaching and training insights with updates from the off-season. Because I've said this before, I've always sort of taken an off season, but never fully embraced what that looks like. And it's all a new experience for me. I don't even know if I'm fully embracing it right now, whatever that means. But I've tried out really kind of reducing volume and listening to my body and trying to get feeling really, really good, especially coming off a training block that ended up working out really well, but I didn't feel so great at the very end. And the great news is recovering works. I actually am starting to feel recovered. And I wish it were more of a magic sauce recipe for figuring out how to do this. But the truth is, just do less stuff, eat a lot of food, sleep a lot, hydrate really well, and do things that fill your soul cup, and you will probably recover pretty fast. So yeah, just been really, really excited about that. And I did want to share, if you're interested in taking some type of off season, any of our listeners out there are some metrics that you can track that I think help you understand how far along you are on that recovery journey. So for me, looking at things like HRV and resting heart rate and then sleep quality and quantity, those, we all have these devices that track them. I am always plugging the Oura Ring. I really like that for tracking those metrics, and Garmin does it too. Those have all really normalized and gotten back to a good baseline for me, which indicates, yeah, my body is recovering. It's not going haywire like it was when my volume and intensity were both just really, really high. And overall, I just feel like I have pretty good energy. I'm excited to get outside. I'm excited to move. I'm not pushing that too hard, but, I'm getting outside and doing different types of activities. And I've been hiking and I've been doing some yoga and I've played pickleball a couple of times. And then, of course, I'm swimming and biking and running a little bit as well, but nothing hard, no intensity. I mostly just do that stuff because I like it and it's convenient. But all this is to say, take that off season and you will start to feel awesome. And I'm already excited about 2025.
It is really interesting that, off season, there's no, culture's not out there going hey, do less. It's always it's about the grind and it's about posting stuff on social media. So I feel like with the off season, it's this very internally based thing for somebody, as opposed to there's not a lot of external validation you're getting from an off season. It's all this internal, but it's hard. You have to really be in tune with your body to really embrace an off season.
Totally. And we could probably have a whole episode on this, but I think it's so natural to really like external validation. We like this in life. We like this in sport. We post all of our stuff, but we need to figure out deriving a lot of internal validation from what we're doing. At the end of the day, I think that's what makes sport fun and sustainable. And so for me, it's been exciting to say no, I'm not going to put my HRV on Strava, but I'm really excited about the fact that it looks super good because I also feel really good and I feel healthy and all those things are really important. So yeah, stuff like journaling and deep reflection, I think, can help you tap into some of that internal reflection. And I've said it probably on every podcast for the last 2 months, and we'll say it again. Strava breaks are probably a good thing sometimes. But yeah, glad that things are feeling pretty good and really encourage all of our athletes to be serious about the off season. We as coaches can support you in that. And we will be there when the off season is over and we're ready to grind again.
That's for sure. And also too, take a break from Training Peaks as well too, because, Training Peaks has this wonderful performance management chart and you look at it and go, oh, look at my lines going up and we're all chasing this fitness and this CTL number. But I wish it had this off-season mode. It'd be from light mode to dark mode, if you will, and have sort of performance, recovery chart, right? And that would, the line would go up. And so for all of us type A triathletes, look, my chart's going up. I'm doing really well by taking an off-season. But unfortunately, there is no switch in Training Peaks. So yeah, like you say, with Strava, maybe take a break. We're on a break, Training Peaks.
And I would say too, I think we've talked about good data and bad data, but I think training peaks, their recovery metrics often lag a little bit ahead of when you're actually fully, deeply recovered. We've talked about different stages of recovery, but training peaks, if you take 3 days off after an Ironman, usually your form metric, your TSB, goes all the way back up just like you were before the race. And it's like, oh yeah, you're totally fine. You're completely recovered. And you're like on the couch, haven't slept in 3 days, your entire body hurts and you feel like shit. So I think just tapping into how you feel and not only using those metrics, we don't really encourage our athletes to look at that stuff so much because it's our job. But that's where I, as a coach, shut things down. And I'm always like, after an Ironman, you need to recover for like a month. It's never going to be just a 3 days turnaround and you're fine. And if you do go back into that, you're on the edge probably of illness and injury. And that's kind of the last thing that we want to see after a really big race like an Ironman.
All right. So how does your next few weeks look like continuing the off season?
Yeah, so I'm glad that you asked because I'm in this exciting sort of recovery phase of thinking about my next season and thinking about what I can focus on now that my energy levels are really, really good. And I think one thing that our athletes can start thinking about after they've taken maybe 4 to 6 weeks of super unstructured, super focus on fun, super focus on easy, is some time in the gym that's focusing on fixing the little things that we don't focus on during our big prep time. So I've actually spent a lot of time kind of doing different stability exercises, anti-rotation exercises, a whole lot of action on the glute med, which gets neglected a lot in triathletes and runners. And it's stuff that, my heart rate is not going up. It's probably never even going beyond zone 1, but it's really, really hard little muscle things. So again, working with a strength trainer, that's been really awesome for me to focus on. And then I also have been trying to switch up different planes of movement in the cardio that I'm doing. So just today, actually, I went out and did a set of Harvard Stadium. So if you go out to the Harvard Stadium, you can do 37 flights of really, really big stairs. And it amounts to something like, I think, 1,500 feet of elevation gain in like 35, 40 minutes. And I was out there and I was like, why did I not do this every single week leading up to Sea to Summit? Because it's exactly like the trail, but I wasn't doing that as part of training. And it's been cool to say, hey, I'm working on this different type of cardio that's amazing fitness, but it's not pounding my body just like running would be. And I'm taking a little bit of a break from that. So there's a million different ways to do that. You can get in your paddling era. You can get in your like yoga era, anything like that. But yeah, really, really pushing, take a step back from serious swim, bike, run all the time, because I think it can really just help balance out your body and get it super strong and super mobile and super ready for the next phase.
Wow, this is a great, I'm reading through your list. Yeah, yoga, pickleball, Harvard Stadium. This is a great off season. Can you program this in for me as well? This is awesome.
We should market. We're the off-season coaches. It's really fun.
Exactly right. Yeah, so there are many phases of the year, right? There's the base phase and the build phase, and you guys can find another coach for that. But when it's the 2 months of off-season, like, come to us. We are your source, for 2 months.
Exactly. So anyway, that's the off-season. We've talked about it a while. I'm going to keep talking about it because it is a journey for me. But I think right now I might transition into the rest of my coaching and training insights. We've got a lot of pretty beefy insights today that I think we'll riff on. And the first one that I wanted to talk about was different ways that you can track progress over time. And one of the best ways to do that is actually through repetitions. We've talked about, different types of benchmarking sets. We're going to talk about those actually later today in the context of training with different zones. But I think one of the easiest and most organic ways to see if you're getting better is to just repeat either the same route or the same workout at 2 different points in time and look at your data. So do that workout by feel, and then see how things like heart rate and pace compare over time in these 2 different situations. So I'm going to give you some examples here for how to actually execute this in practice. One could be doing the exact same swim set for a series of weeks. So we've even done something like, it doesn't have to be a hard swim set, but like 10 by 100s, alternate, easy, fast. See what your easies look like, see what your fasts look like over a period of weeks. And you'll probably see that the easies are getting faster and the fasts are getting faster. Or maybe you just see that the easies are getting faster. And maybe it's just by 1 second per 100, but all of those little changes really, really add up. And again, sometimes you're going to have an off day. Sometimes maybe you didn't sleep that well. Sometimes you're tired from the weekend or whatever it was. But on average, you should be trending faster as you build fitness. And it's not as scary as saying, hey, I'm going into a swim threshold test. That's so scary. This is just, I'm just doing my workout. It was the same workout I had last week, but look, I'm a little bit better. And even just seeing you get faster at something that feels easy, that is a huge indicator for progress. I had one athlete who went out for a 90-minute easy spin the other day, and we were looking at her heart rate and her speed on a route that she does all the time. And she was going really fast, and her average heart rate was like 126. That's an amazing way to see really, really big fitness. where maybe a couple of months ago she would have been at 142 heart rate or something like that. So love the repetition, and you can do that in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the idea of organic testing. I think most of us we have the same basically run routes, and so finding a particular run route or a bike route or something and just doing it over and over again, like we always do anyway. And I think you say there's just these little subtle changes that will show you like I am getting fitter, and you will hit a pivot point at some point, right? And you'll go, oh my God, I feel amazing. But there's always little subtle changes along the way that you can see if you really dig into it. So yeah, I love this. This really resonated with me. And something I've been reading this week was actually a sociology paper. I don't know how I came across that, but it's called The Mundanity of Excellence. And really what it's about was like these high performers, like they thrive on boredom and repetition. And something I talk about a lot is like if you constantly need a new workout or a variation, you're probably more focused on entertainment than the actual process and performance. And so a general characteristic of high performers is they keep it simple, they keep it low stress, which is exactly what you're doing here, and they just practice the fundamentals over and over again. And so anyway, back to this paper I was reading. And so the overview of this paper, it says, excellence is mundane. It says that there's nothing special about high performers. They just have a set of habits, practices, and mindsets that individually aren't particularly groundbreaking, but when added together and compounded over a long period of time, result in a phenomenon of excellence. It's all very mundane. And I just love that, because I just see that over and over again with athletes who just say, I'm just willing to do the work, and it's not always big and sexy, if you will.
Totally. We've said this time and time again, but things like swim workouts, like, yeah, we have a huge library of swim workouts, but if you only ever did like 3 to 5 different swim workouts and you got in the pool consistently every single week, 3 times a week, something like that, you would see really big progress. And even for me, like I talk a lot about my Monday tech swim. It's the exact same swim pretty much every single time, because the purpose is just working on technique. And I actually, yes, do see these speeds getting faster and faster at an incredibly easy effort. That's the key. But it's the exact same swim. And sometime I'll just share what that swim is. It's a bunch of hundreds with different combinations of gear. And that's what I do. And so again, like you need to challenge yourself in different ways, but especially when the goal is like easy and technique and just being comfortable out there, it's got to be the same thing. Zone 2 is going to be the same thing. You don't want a sexy run workout every single time you're going out for a run, because probably then your intensity is not going to be where it needs to be.
And also you mentioned too, like it's just organic fitness testing. And I think all of us have a lot of stress in our lives. And I don't know about you, but when there's an FTP test or a swim test on my Training Peaks, I stress out. And I stress out for days in advance of the whole thing. So it's a great way to be like, okay, we're not going to stress you out, but we are going to see that there is progress here.
Oh yeah, I get so stressed out with test sets too, even if it's just benchmarking. Like an FTP test is as scary for me as a race is. But if I just say, oh, what's my heart rate if I do the same route easy? Like that's super chill. That's nothing to worry about.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
And this segues right into another insight that I was thinking about, which is that I do have some athletes that have been reporting different types of anxiety around executing hard workouts. And this is happening especially actually from former Ironman or 70.3 athletes that are closing out their seasons with some sprint or Olympic training. And that type of racing and training is kind of hard in a very different way. So I had one athlete say, a run that had 20 minutes at Olympic race pace off the bike felt more intimidating than a run with 60 minutes at 70.3 race pace off the bike. And so I'd say this is actually something that's very normal. I get super nervous about some of the really, really hard sessions too. I think one day in the spring, I told my run coach that I would rather race an Ironman tomorrow than race a mile on the track. And as a result, she had me do a lot of hard track and tempo workouts until they weren't that scary anymore. But the point here is like, yeah, anything new and uncertain often does cause anxiety, and exposure to it is one of the best things that you can do to get over that. So worst case, like you don't hit your intervals, that's completely fine. The intention of the workout was to get out there and give it a try, and that will help us make our race plan going forward. But in my experience, the anticipation is usually so much worse than the real thing. And that's true for racing too. And the more that you do it, I would say the less scary that it is.
Yeah, I always come back to that quote from Seneca, which says, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. I think Seneca wrote that for triathletes actually. So
that's a really good one. And I think this again now segues into my next one, but I think a lot of the time we can talk about sport advice also being life advice. There's a lot of parallels here. So if you're worried about something in your imagination that's not sport related, probably in reality it's going to be a little bit easier. And so then to take that segue, here's another piece of advice that is sort of for racing and pre-race mindset, but also just for life, is I think it is very natural for us as humans to sort of catastrophize and assume that the worst case scenario is going to happen in races or in life. So in a race, You might be nervous and you say like, well, I'm probably going to get a flat, or I'm probably going to walk this marathon, or I'm probably going to have GI issues. And what's tricky is that from a psychological standpoint, the more that we do this, the more we create neural pathways that will just do this in the future. You can imagine it kind of like a groove in a piece of wood with a knife. Like every time you take that negative path, you make the groove deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's just sort of your default. And so something that I work on a lot when I find myself just expecting the worst case scenario is trying to force myself to think of the best case scenario instead. So I PR'd the race. I had no GI issues. I won the race, whatever that is. And the important part here is that you might not actually believe that. And that's actually totally fine. It's the practice of imagining the best case scenario that's creating these new neural networks that are like, oh, well, maybe anytime something happens, I could imagine the worst case scenario, but also I'll imagine the best case scenario. And you can imagine that same groove in the wood with the knife. Like if you make one little groove in there, it doesn't look like much, but if you practice it over and over and over again of, okay, what is the best case scenario in this situation? Then it's more likely that anytime something comes up, you're actually going to think of both, or you might bias towards better scenarios, or maybe you'll actually just default to saying, hey, this could actually be really, really good. And in practice, usually what happens is somewhere in the middle too. So just keep that in mind. But I would say both for life and for this pre-race nerve stuff, anytime you catch yourself assuming the worst, just try your best to imagine the best. And that might help alleviate a little bit of that anxiety.
Yeah, and it's so natural too. I mean, humans have this natural negative bias because, this is a survival instinct. And, you and I are alive because generations of our families they were cautious, and they probably weren't out there like full sending things, jumping off cliffs or doing really high dangerous things out in the plains or on the farm. But yeah, like you say, luckily we've evolved far enough that we can begin to distinguish through practice what's a real danger, what's this imagined danger. And I really like the way you describe it here about creating new neural pathways, because that's exactly what it is. And so, being able to define and draw that line is like a mental skill that just requires a lot of conscious practice.
Should we also start a psychology podcast? I feel like this could be rebranded.
We totally should. Well, we already have had this. We're actually going to take little clips of this and just create a new, like the endurance drive mindset, right? Yeah.
The endurance drive psychology practice. We don't have credentials, but it's fine.
We can do a little snip up here, and then we have a year-long course that you guys can sign up for only $500.
I love it. That sounds great. Okay, I have one more insight here. This is sort of a listener question that I figured could also be an insight because it does come up a lot with our athletes. The question is, if you are sick, when should you take extra rest and when should you push through it? So I say as a coach, general rule of thumb is if you have a fever, aches, any symptoms that are below the neck, so stuff like chest congestion, cough, or GI issues, I would take the day off and focus on resting and hydrating. I found that sometimes if you just have like a cold or allergies and you're just congested, but your energy levels are fine and maybe your resting heart rate is fine, HRV is fine, I think that easy zone 1-2 stuff like a ride or a run can sometimes help flush things out, but you want to be really cautious and avoid hard workouts and also shut it down if you start to feel worse. So if you're someone who really struggles to take rest, that's maybe an area where you could gaslight yourself a little bit and be like, I'm fine, I'm going to go out for my zone 2 2-hour bike ride and feel worse. So again, just be cautious about that advice. And again, just like I said, tracking those things like resting heart rate and HRV can tell you something about how deep in your system the sickness is, or if it's more just kind of a high level nasal congestion situation. And then I think I'll just share our golden rule for injuries. This goes for illness too. Sometimes 1 or 2 days off can prevent 1 or 2 weeks or months off. So going all in on recovery can pay off a lot and get you back on your feet faster than if you half-ass that recovery for weeks.
Yeah, so back to the theme of we are the recovery coaches.
I know. This is fun. Being a coach in the recovery phase is the best.
Yeah, don't do anything. Exactly. Just hang out, guys. It's all cool. You feel a little migraine headache? Take a couple weeks off. No problem. You're right on schedule. This is perfect. We programmed that in.
And that'll be $200.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you very much.
All right. That was a lot of insights from me. I'm going to hand it over to you, Jim, for your round of coaching and training insights.
Well, these I told you before podcast started, like how your insights were great. Mine are a little bit more mundane than that. But so my first insight, this was just coming from I'm coming back from injury. And as a lot of you know, broken femur in 2 places and having some real hip issues. And anyway, so I've been doing tons of strength work, which is awesome. And I'm getting stronger. And that's really fun to see that progress in the gym. And also put pants on and go, wow, my hips are getting bigger. This is awesome. This must be getting stronger. But what's also interesting is that I'm not necessarily coordinating. So I still have a lot of muscles that some are turn on, some are turning off, that kind of thing. And so this got me thinking about like just the importance of like all this technique work that we talk about with swimming or running or even biking. And so you could be a super strong athlete, but if you're not coordinated, you won't move efficiently. And so I don't know, I feel like, having a big engine, but if you don't know how to really, how to have a car to drive it in, like it's just a big engine, right? So anyway, that's all my way of saying just like, don't skip your drills, focus on technique. And again, off season is a great time to sort of, like you talked about, is getting back to some of those basics.
Yeah, I think so. It's tough because once again, that stuff is not always the sexiest type of training. It's a little bit like, yeah, I'm doing raise my knee up and step back down over and over again. It's like, okay, this is not that exciting, but that's often the stuff that actually makes the difference, even compared to like max deadlift in the gym. At the end of the day, for endurance athletes, that doesn't really need to be your primary focus. You need to start with technique and coordination. So I'm glad you're working on it. I am working on it in parallel, and we're going to encourage all of our athletes to get on the unsexy coordination train because it's so helpful for performance down the line.
And I may have talked about this in one podcast before, but I had one summer where I had some sort of lower injury. I'm not sure if it was Achilles or something. And so I had enough mobility and enough ability to do drills. So I went down to my place where I usually start my run, and it has a couple hills. And so I just did like all my marches and a lot of the stuff that we have in our run drills and our training peak stuff. I was able to do some hill bounding and some sprints, but just not run very long. And so I did that for a couple months. And so basically it was all just sort of strength and coordination work and really no running at all. And when I got back to running, I took about 30 seconds off my base pace, and I was just stronger and a little bit more coordinated. And it had nothing to do with how many miles I put in that summer, because I didn't really put any miles in that summer.
So maybe that is kind of sexy and cool magic training. I don't know. I think that's cool. I think everyone should try it.
That's very true. Okay, so my next one here is that it is, like we mentioned, it is sort of late season, and folks are looking at their last races, and sort of it's been interesting having some conversations because some folks are saying, okay, it's my last season, last race of the year. What should I do? And so we sort of been going through like, some scenarios, and some of the scenarios are like, I want to go all out. I want to go high risk, high reward strategy. And, typically these are athletes who have achieved most of their goals for the year, and they're really just kind of let it all hang out at the end of the year before their off season starts. And I also have some athletes who are just using the short races maybe to set themselves up for like the really last long race of the year. I still have some who are racing Ironmans or other 70.3s. And I guess the larger point here is that we're always advocating, like, what do you want to get out of your race? Like, what's the goal, and having a goal for your race. And it's been different this at the end of the year because some folks can really go for it. Some people are still kind of in that conservative mode, building it up. But I don't know, I just find it just important to like just define what do you want to get out of your races. And particularly with the last races, because those are the ones that your brain's probably going to come back to the most if it's your last race of the year.
This is interesting. I was actually not going to mention this at all on the podcast, but I just feel drawn to do it now, and we can cut it out if we want to. But I actually do have one more race this year. I'm racing an Olympic in a couple of weeks that I signed up for a long time ago. We're actually just visiting friends in Long Island, and there was a race that weekend that they wanted to do. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. We're on like a team trying to have some team goal or whatever. So anyway, I'm doing this Olympic race. And it's interesting to think about my goals for that race just in the context of your reflections here, because for me, I'm not training for this race. Everything I said about the off season, like that's exactly what I'm doing right now. Me doing Harvard stadiums today was not prepping me for this Olympic distance race. I have not touched my tri-bike since Sea to Summit because the aero bar was broken. And I just had the bike shop shove some piece in there because they didn't have the right piece to fix it. Like, it's really going to be just go in and see what happens. But I think that's actually even a cool goal. If people really feel kind of like they're done with their main racing of the season, but maybe you have some lingering races, every single one of our athletes has the fitness that you could roll into a sprint or Olympic distance race tomorrow or in 3 weeks and be fine. That's kind of true at any time of the year for the majority of our athletes. So yeah, I'm just curious to even think about what that's going to be like. I'm sure that it'll give us some content no matter what, which is part of the reason that we're doing it. But truly, like, my race strategy and training strategy is to borrow a quote from Simone Biles and others that I'm pretty sure was not used in this specific scenario. Like, I'm just gonna fuck around and find out. That's what she says. I think she means like if anyone messes with her, then they'll find out what happens. But I'm just like fucking around and finding out what happens if I don't train for a race and they go do it for fun. So that's one goal you could adopt.
Oh yeah, no, this is so great. I'm so glad you brought this up. This is really cool. And there is something so incredibly liberating, showing up for a race and just doing it. And like, this is like, for you, like, this is just pure fun, right? This is just like, I get to do this because I love these sports. I love these sports individually. Maybe not all of them. Maybe you don't love swimming. Who does, right? Apologies to all the swimmers out there. But just go out there. And I think also too, like, there's just liberation. And we talked about it a couple podcasts ago, like just like play over perfection, right? Just play. And this is just ultimate play. And to go like get off the bike and then just go run, for 6 miles for the heck of it, at whatever pace you want to, like, who knows what the result is? It doesn't matter what the result is, but like, I think it's so rare that we actually put ourselves in that position of being like, this is just out here for pure fun. No results.
Yeah, I was even considering doing it without a watch, like just to see what that would be like, to just completely go by feel. And I have no idea what my paces are because I don't even know if I'm going to do a road run before this race. I'm vibing on my like pickleball and stuff like that. But yeah, that's okay to do too. And I feel like I achieved my goals for the season. So why not just get to do races that are fun? And if at any point leading up to it, I don't feel like mentally or physically it's going to be fun, then I'm probably not going to do it. Yeah. But for now, I think like, why not? Let's have a triathlon play date. It'll be awesome.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. You should try to do it without a bike too. That'd be kind of cool, right? Just like, I'm no watch, no bike, no nothing, people. Like I'm
gonna take my unicycle and do that.
Exactly.
I do
a scooter.
I have a unicycle from childhood that I could just bring out. That's a fun fact about me is that I can ride unicycles. I might just do that for this Olympic.
And you can do the silkies as well at the end too. Yeah.
Next episode is a deep dive on my career as a circus artist in my childhood, which actually is totally real. So.
It's totally real. It's real, people. We'll get to that.
All right, last insight for you, Jim.
Okay, what is my last insight? Okay, so as you guys who follow us, you hear this all the time, but talking about fueling and fitness are equal partners on race day. And again, just keep going back to like, we keep messaging this out to our athletes because I still have athletes coming to be saying, oh my gosh, this year I went from 60 grams or whatever to 80 grams or 90 grams. And I'm crushing it this year. And you see it in their race results. And it's just so fun to see people who like worked so hard for so long say, oh my God, I'm having these huge breakthroughs. And yeah, they're a little bit faster this year because they're fitter and they have more experience. But really, I think fueling is just a huge game changer for so many of our athletes. And the thing is, they weren't that far off either. They were only maybe 10 or 20% off their thing. But the difference between like, say, 60 grams per hour and 80 grams is huge. And the difference is like, oh, medium performance. Like, yeah, I kind of worked hard. I was fit. I did okay at the race. To then people finishing a race going, oh my God, I felt amazing. I felt strong. I felt like I was racing. I felt like I'm finally expressing who I am like as a triathlete. So just circling back to like, keep fueling, folks.
I think so too. And I think if you've gotten to maybe that like 70 to 80 neighborhood and you think it's going well for you, that's a great signal to say, what happens if I go more? Often people do even better at 85, 90. We don't really know what the limits are. I mean, we see some professionals that are taking in 120, 130 grams of carbs per hour. So I would say don't assume that just because you got to 70 or 80, that is the limit. That means your gut's really good at absorbing that. So let's see if we can go higher because you are only going to perform better. And it's very rare that I think we see people fall off the devastating reverse bonk side of things that we've talked about before. That's usually a timing thing more than a content thing. So yeah, just keep pushing it and you'll get some really, really big results.
Yeah, buddy. All right, bring snacks. Oh, wait, are we on our main content yet? Oh, my gosh.
We are. Yeah,
we've arrived.
We left people hanging. We've arrived. We haven't talked about what's going on today because we had so many good insights. But today's topic is the topic of intervals. So we're actually going to do some training philosophy here on how we think about structuring intervals in our workouts. Pretty much all the workouts that we do, if it's anything but plain zone 2, there are intervals in there. And so we're just going to tell you how to get fast in swimming and biking and running using different types of intervals. So Jim, why don't you take us away and tell us what are intervals?
Oh, well, first of all, what I wanted to do is actually for this episode, I wanted to do the whole thing on VO2 max intervals. He said, we're not doing that. Like, that's just, come on, VO2s, man, what's up with that? I'm like, it's the best. People want to talk about VO2 max intervals all the time. When you say intervals, people, a lot of times they go, oh, that's VO2 max stuff. That's the really hard stuff, right? I want to talk all about that. And have people sending me articles. What about these VO2 max things? I'm like, okay, I guess we should talk about that. But anyway, cooler heads prevailed. I think I made the right choice. And,
well, we will talk about VO2 max among other intervals,
yes.
But we just can't give them all the fame. There's many other important intervals out there.
Right.
And so this is going to be VO2 max and many other intervals.
And the more I sort of dug into this, I realized like, oh, right, we haven't like really done it. Like what are intervals? Why should we do intervals? Like just sort of like, we're calling this intervals of 101, right? So we're just going to start real basic and keep it a little bit high level. And, again, if you are coaching yourself, this is a lot of good takeaways in here, or maybe you're just interested in like, what does it mean by intervals? So anyway, let's start with what are intervals. And I think the best way to start with, like, what's not an interval? An interval is not like an easy run of just like, say, an hour, right? And oftentimes for uncoached athletes, usually it's a run that's kind of in zone 3. It's not too easy. It's not too hard. You're just going out and you're just running that does have a purpose. And we do a lot of that here at the Endurance Drive. But An interval really happens when we begin to slice up the time pie into smaller chunks to target certain adaptations. So for example, like that 60-minute run becomes like a zone 1, zone 2, 20-minute warm-up. And then we go into a 2 by 10 minutes at threshold pace with 2 minutes easy between, and then a 15-minute cool down, zone 1, zone 2. So that right there is an interval. So we commonly think of intervals as these times when we're doing the actual work. And so in the above example, like we're focusing on that 10-minute work increments. However, the interval and workout structure changes a lot based on the recovery interval. So for example, like a 2 by 10 threshold pace workout with the 1 minute recovery is very different than say a 2 by 10 minute threshold pace with a 5-minute recovery. So the first interval set is a near continuous interval of 20 minutes of work, because 1 minute is not a lot of time to recover. But if you add in a 5-minute recovery in there, you get full recovery, and it really becomes then 2 distinct intervals. So again, when you talk about intervals, you're talking about both the work rate and the recovery rate as well.
Definitely. And I think as we get closer to race day, you can use those shorter intervals to sort of mimic your race demands. So one of our favorite workouts, for example, is a tempo run with SR, short recovery. And it's like 5 minutes at tempo, 1 minute recovery in between. That's going to get really close to doing like a tempo type run. That's a little bit more maybe half Ironman effort. And then earlier in the year, maybe use much longer intervals so that you can really challenge yourself, but then also not overload. And this reminds me actually of something that I worked on earlier. I think it was April, May of this year. I was really trying to work on kind of anaerobic efforts. And so for the first time ever, I did a track workout that had actually like passive recovery, like standing there for 2 minutes in between really, really hard 400s on the track. And it was super different from if I just jogged the 400 in between, because if I jogged in between, I would have more of sort of an endurance-y workout, but I wouldn't have been able to hit that really hard max effort. And again, sometimes that's what we want. Sometimes we want more of an endurance stimulus. But then if my goal was anaerobic, that was giving myself as much recovery as possible. So again, there's a time and a place for different types of rest intervals and recovery intervals, as well as hard ones that meet the demands of season planning and the training cycle. But again, yeah, you're totally right that it's not just the work part. The recovery interval is just as important for pretty much anything that we do.
Yeah, I love that example too. It's a great example of like the extremes, right? And sort of like being in the weight room as well too. Like you lift something really, really heavy, and then like you stand around or sit around for like 2 or 3 minutes, let yourself recharge, and then go at it again. And like that's like the ultimate like in intervals. So
I mean, I think a lot of endurance athletes are guilty of making the gym an endurance workout. So they're going from like exercise to exercise with as little recovery as possible, and their average heart rate's like 135 in the gym. And I've seen that come in. I'm like, this is not really what we're looking for in the gym. You know, maybe that's a HIIT workout, but often what we want is heavy weight, low reps, injury prevention. The gym is not an interval workout, actually, is maybe the way that I would phrase this.
Yes, I love going to the gym and distinguishing between the endurance athletes and the actual lifters. So it is very interesting. And they're two very distinct beasts in the gym. Yes, for sure. I think one important note here is that, you know, while we talk a lot about zone 2 here, there is really only one sort of body energy system. And so like the body's not like a series of silos or zones. So training in one quote zone, I'm saying here, will have an effect on all other zones. So an easy run not only helps build out your aerobic foundation, but it also helps raise your threshold in VO2 max. Maybe very subtly, but it is helping that as well. So when we include intervals within a workout, we challenge the body to work more in multiple physiological zones, or we can think of them as levels. But just the point is like, don't think of like, oh, I'm only working this one zone, because your body's like all one thing. Like your body and mind are all one thing. We're talking about a lot as well here too. So we're not really siloing the body, if you will.
That even speaks to the importance of like honoring the warm up and the cool down. I often see if people go out for a track workout, for example, I'll look at the first 2 miles, their warm up, and I'm like, why is the heart rate 155, 165 in here? Like you're already in the zone that we were trying to get during parts of the track workout. So again, it speaks to the idea, just because it doesn't say specifically in the workout, like this part is the zone 2 run and this part is the hard part, you've got to keep that warm up and that cool down in those other zones so that you can use the hard intervals to try to get the higher zones that you're focusing on.
Preach it, sister. Preach it. Okay, so why do intervals? All right, first one here is we're going to recruit your slow and your fast twitch muscles. A lot of times in endurance, we're doing a lot of work and a lot of slow, but we also want to engage some of your fast twitch muscles as well. And we also want to turn on all your motor units. You know, you need muscle engagement to grow a muscle. So again, engaging the entire body. And then we also want to challenge the heart and the aerobic system to increase stroke volume and deliver more blood and oxygen to your muscles. And the last one here is just like this mental race preparedness. We want to mimic the race demands.
Totally. And as coaches, usually we're choosing different types of intervals because we're trying to improve something specific for that athlete. So we think about a lot of things in deciding what intervals are appropriate for you. What is your current fitness? What are your skills? What are your capabilities? And then how do we best use the time that we have between now and race day to move you to the next level specific to your A-race demands? That takes a lot of sort of finagling on our end, but just keep in mind that if you're getting program workouts from us, we have a plan. We're doing that for a specific reason. And if you're programming for yourself, you can kind of deep dive on, okay, what are my goals? How close am I to race day? Am I in the specific prep phase? Am I in the general prep phase? What are my limiters? Is it endurance? Is it speed, et cetera? Those are the questions that we ask ourselves as coaches and that you can definitely be asking yourself too.
And like you say, Katie, as either as an individual, as coaching yourself or as coaches, we always say, so when do I start these intervals, right? And so it's really important to have like some basic foundation of fitness and aerobic training before you start intervals, because intervals they're really powerful medicine, and you can do more damage than good if you start them too early in the season or just really too early in your athletic development. So when you are in doubt, if you are ready for interval training, do more base work, because it can never be too robust. So for example, I have a returning athlete, and she's run marathons before. She's done a triathlon, pretty strong athlete in general, but she's signed up for the Philadelphia Marathon, which is at late November. So we're in that build period now. But her weekly average miles now are about 15 miles. So this person asked, like, hey, I don't see any speed work on my plan. I'm like, well, given that there's a fairly low volume heading into the build, the heart of the marathon plan, our first priority is just frequent, easy runs. And so like over the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll focus on ramping up easy run volume, and we'll throw in some 20-second, 30-second pickup strides. But really, before we reduce any type of run interval training, we just want to make sure that we're focusing on volume and robustness and durability before speed.
Totally. And I think this speaks to the point about patience and actually hitting the workouts for the most part in your training plan. We always say there's flexibility and you don't have to be perfect, but you need kind of 80 to 85% compliance with the workouts that are in there. And so I always tell athletes, like, yes, we can go to the sexy, exciting workouts, but you have to get the time in on those initial workouts that might not be as exciting. So if I have an athlete who kind of missed their pickups on the first couple of runs in, we're probably not going to then progress to the track workout next. And the first track work that they're going to do is going to be pretty easy. It's going to be probably 6x200s or something that's not that hard, but you've got to kind of move through the ranks, I would say, of different types of workouts, which for everybody, unless you have a really incredible base, is going to start out with things like pickups and strides.
Yep. So now how do I determine the intervals that are appropriate for me? And there's a lot of ways to do this. We're going to give you a few examples here. But first, you want to sort of measure your current thresholds. And in other words, what is my current fitness level? And then you want to set a baseline to measure your improvement. So for example, like on the swim, and we're putting links here, but like you can do a 400 and 200 best effort and then take the average time. And that's what's called your critical swim speed. And again, we put a link in here. You guys can dig more into that. A bike, it's the functional threshold test, the FTP test that we've talked about many, many times. That's the 30-minute warm-up, 5-minute all-out, 20 minutes best effort, and then you take 0.59% of that for your normalized power for your 20-minute test. But again, you guys can read all about this. And the last one here is we like to do this 10-minute run test because it's a little bit easier than, say, like 5x1 miles, for example. And so then we take the average times of those 10-minute intervals, and we add about 30 seconds, and that'll give you right in the ballpark of what your thresholds are. And of course, the last method you could do, or one of the other methods you could do, is you get really scientific, and you can go to the lab, and you can do lactate, you can do heart, you can do pace and watts testing in a lab, which we've done before. Super useful, but any one of these sort of backyard science tests that we've outlined here will also work.
And one more that I'll add to this, I did this in the spring and I've done it once since then, is Garmin's guided lactate threshold test. I've seen it work in varying degrees of success for different people, but often it's not that hard. So I can have someone do that and not treat it like an all-out effort. And I've actually had a couple athletes do both the 2x10 test and the lactate threshold test from Garmin just to get a little bit more granular data. That's something else you can play around with. Just note that you need to have a heart rate strap for this to even work. It won't let you do it unless you have one. And you should be using a heart rate strap anyway for times when you're trying to get granular heart rate data from these zone tests.
So what are our main considerations for intervals? There's really sort of three, and that is, one is the duration. So like how long is the work and the rest interval, like we talked about. And the second one here is frequency, like how often are we doing intervals in the week or the micro or mesocycle. And the third one here is intensity, and that's the primary adaptation we desire will dictate the level of intensity. So for us as coaches, we tend to value them in that order. If the intervals are too hard, we lose training time. we really tend to value volume and consistency more, as this will serve you best in the short and the long run.
And we'll say that in a general year, you'll probably do between 50 and 150 interval sessions. And so they need to be sustainable. That's a lot of different things. And if you feel destroyed or discouraged every single time you do intervals, you're going to stop doing them. So we're thinking about accumulated work duration, AWD, I like that abbreviation, over a period of months as the goal. And keep in mind here too, intervals can be really simple and basic. If we're even talking about pickups, like those 20-second pickups with 40-second recovery, that counts as an interval. But if there's only 8 of them in your 6-mile run, that's not going to be a huge, huge stimulus. It's still going to get you ready though to do longer stuff and go faster.
And for our coach athletes, we really emphasize like commenting on your training piece, like how did it feel, during these intervals? Because, we're looking at the numbers, but we're also looking at things like how did it feel? And we're also looking at sort of the consistency and also like where was your mental game when things got tough? So again, when it comes, you see intervals in your training peaks, like think, okay, I need to know what the intervals are. I need to have an intention around them. And I also then need to follow up and comment to myself and to my coach about how it all went.
All right, so I think now we'll maybe just go through some general principles for intervals. The first one here that's important is when in doubt, you want to keep your intervals simple. So you should be able to really easily remember what your interval workout is. If you need extensive notes that you have to refer to during the workout, it's probably too complicated. So here, less is more. And this actually reminds me, I had a new athlete recently who had a previous coach who would always program workouts in training peaks that then sync directly to her Garmin. And so her Garmin would tell her when to do the intervals. And it was a little hard for her to adjust to me just saying like, no, just remember it. It's 8x400s. That's the workout. But I think in general, that's a really, really good practice because the intervals don't always have to be perfect. Like we want to generally follow what we're doing here. But if it turns out that you're supposed to take 60 seconds rest and one time it was 55 seconds and one time it was 65 seconds because there was an oncoming truck, like that is okay. Go back to this principle about the intention of the workout. And this is true too, like if you're doing bike intervals, I had an athlete who was asking questions about how do I execute this power on a kind of hilly course? And my answer was just do your best. You're sometimes going to be pushing harder on the uphills. Sometimes it's going to be backing off a little bit on the downhills. But just think about the fact that we're trying to get some time in roughly your half Ironman race watts for about 10 minutes a bunch of times. You will do pretty well if you can get at least close to that.
It is interesting too. Yeah, I have athletes also who've come back and who've had training plans where it's like the Garmin told me in my swim to do this, and on the run it said to do that. And then we're like, well, we're not those coaches. And I think first they're like, we're going backwards here. What kind of service are you guys running here? And we sort of talk through it. Like you just talk about the intention and sometimes it's easier, sometimes harder. And also that we don't want you to be a robot. You're not a robot. So sometimes you need a little bit more longer interval, shorter rest, longer rest. You never know, truck coming, hill, whatever it is. So go out there, know the intention, execute the best you can. And really, and it comes down to it, like that's what the best in all sports do. Like no pro is out there, pro runner, pro cyclist, pro triathlete is out there looking at their watch and saying, oh, my watch just buzzed. I have to now run 30 seconds hard. Oh, no, my watch just buzzed. Now I have 30 seconds of recovery. Like nobody does that at all. So by coming back and sort of getting more in touch with your body, getting more in touch with the feel, the intention of the workout, like that's the pro level stuff.
Totally. And it's funny, like often we do workouts, for example, on a track, but your body doesn't care or know what 400 meters is versus 412 meters versus 390 meters. Your body's just trying to do something hard and work a system for a little bit of time. So it just doesn't have to be perfect. I think it really just helps to identify what that purpose is and then just try to get close to it. Because again, Strava might know, but your body totally doesn't.
Exactly right. Well, the one here is like always leave one rep in reserve. We've talked about this a bunch, but I actually just got off a phone call with an athlete right before this, Katie. And she said, I want to do some of those really hard workouts you guys described in your, how to crush your fall marathon. And I said, well, we're working on sprint triathlon right now for this athlete and then do a half marathon and maybe an Ironman next year. So I was like, okay, we could do some of that stuff. But again, we talked about I need to build a little more of a foundation around that. And she goes, yeah, but my last coach and my last thing, I was so used to being destroyed after every single run. I'm like, oh no, that's the last thing we want to do. Like, you should never feel destroyed. You should always feel like you've gone 90%. You always have one rep left. And she goes, really? That's how this works? I'm like, oh, absolutely. Because you think about it, you have to get up, like you did that on Monday. And then on Tuesday, you have a bike and a run. Then Wednesday, you go back to running again. So there's always something coming up. So yeah, just always holding back a little bit, always finishing up and saying, yeah, I could have done one more and be happy with that. Because that's sort of the pro move is to say, okay, I had one more, but I'm thinking about my next workout.
Totally. And I think we talk about this often, but you often don't know where the edge of the cliff is, and you don't always want to try and find out. I think it's better to stop 1 foot away from the edge of the cliff than just tap dance on that line and see like, okay, am I going to fall over? Am I not? I think a lot of athletes always tap dance on the line, and that's why a lot of athletes get more injured than I think on average our athletes do, because we're not trying to go to that line. We save that line for race day, and that's why we see these incredible performances on race day for our athletes. But their training is like, yeah, this is hard, but it's not at the line. We don't want to go there.
Exactly right. And sort of on that same line is like, so people ask like, is TSS, training stress score in training peaks, is that a good measure of interval effectiveness? And the answer is absolutely not, because TSS is really skewed towards volume and not necessarily towards intensity. So yeah, don't even bother looking at, like, we've got great workouts. So I think of some of our Swift workouts that are maybe 40 TSS, 50 TSS, and they're an hour, and they're incredible workouts with great adaptations. But you look at the TSS and go, that wasn't really anything big. You're like, actually, that was a pretty big deal.
Totally. I mean, if you think about the fact that racing a 5K all out as hard as you can go is probably like 50, 55 TSS. And you know what else is 50 to 55 TSS? Some of our easiest 60-minute zone 2 bike workouts where your average heart rate is going to be 115. So it's just not a fair apples to apples. I think TSS is really only useful for really our Ironman and then some 70.3 athletes. We use it as one of our many tools, but cannot read into that too much, especially if you're doing that short course interval type stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we love Training Peaks and we use it, obviously, and it's a super valuable tool for us, but it's a very contrived model, if you will, construct. So it has its limitations. So anyway, let's talk about a basic interval workout progression. We talked about this a little bit. So the first thing we want to do is what, Katie?
Just like we were talking about before, we're going to do activation. And a lot of people skip this because it's not fun and sexy, but I put it in my athletes' Training Peaks as you want, for example, a pre-run glute activation or drills. This is especially true with running because if you just activate those muscles, you're going to end up firing and going faster. So all of this is going to happen before you even swim, bike, run, but you should be doing at least 5 minutes of activation before all of your workouts.
Great. And then this is my favorite part of any workout, which is I always talk to athletes about this, but this is the warm-up. It's really, really, really important to transition your body from this resting heart rate. Think about it from like maybe sitting at your desk, maybe at 60 or 70 heart rate to this active heart rate, to this very active heart rate. So the longer and gentler the warm-up, the better you'll perform in your intervals. And this physically and mentally prepares you for the work ahead. So again, don't skip the warm-up. It's so, so important.
Yeah, here, I think we could probably borrow something. I'm thinking a little bit about the Olympics, but from like our sprinter friends, they are not doing a lot of mileage in their workouts, but they probably spend an hour getting loose and warming up in order to then run 100 meters as fast as they can. If you're doing some fast intervals, you should be doing the exact same thing. So +1 on a really, really, really long warm-up. It's okay to, spend even 30 minutes plus at the track to do a relatively short interval progression.
Right. And the next one here, you'll see this in some of our workouts, is we have these things called the primers. And this is sort of to wake up the body and the muscles and the mind and prime the pump for the hard workout. So for example, you might see this in some of our warm-ups as we end a lot of our warm-ups with this 4x25s super fast with 20 seconds rest. Or on our runs, you might see a 2 minute tempo or sort of half marathon pace. And on the bike, this may be like 6 or 8 or 10, like 20-second hard efforts with 40 seconds easy. But again, this is all just priming the pump, getting ready to work hard.
One more that I'll add to that is in almost all of our track workouts, we have people do 4x100 before they do any of the other track intervals. That's pretty short. It shouldn't feel really hard, but you're getting your body used to what you're about to do for a longer duration. And then it's just not as shocking by the time you get there.
Yeah, I'd say the 4x100s in those track workouts, they're just as important, I think, almost as the main set, because I think if you try to start doing the workouts, like then the first couple intervals are like blah, because you just didn't prime the pump. So anyway, so then of course we get to the main set, and this is where the fun happens. And you can do, interval combinations are just really endless. You can get super creative here. So again, you can use the above guidelines to develop your interval training. Some of our intervals that we really like during this specific phase on the swim is usually these fast 50s or fast 100s. We really love these 1 or 2 minute at 10K, 5K paces for our triathlete runs, and or 2x10 at half marathon pace, or again, we talked about some of the 200s and 400s on the track. And we just recently actually outlined a lot of our favorite half marathon and marathon intervals and how to crush your best fall marathon or half marathon podcast. So we put a link in there. And finally, for the bike, my personal favorite is Sweet Spot because it's intense enough to get an adaptation, helps you clear lactate. And that's usually doing some intervals at 5 or 10 minutes at 92% or more. You got threshold at 100% your FTP. And then again, VO2 max, we're not going to go into that because I'm going to convince Katie that we're going to have a whole podcast on VO2 max intervals.
Well, we will say if you do them, I actually have had a couple athletes doing VO2 max progression. So I do believe they're important. But this is like 3 to 5 minutes at 125% of your FTP, usually between 5 and 8 intervals with a pretty good recovery. 5 minutes recovery is a staple here. The goal of VO2 max is to spend time at like kind of 90% of your max heart rate. So it really is pretty hard, but rarely do we have athletes going to 95 to 100% of your max heart rate. I pretty much never have athletes going to max heart rate unless it's in like a 5K race scenario or some incredibly hard track workouts with a specific anaerobic focus. But we save that. That's kind of we're in that edge category that we're saving for race day. And so I don't love people going there too often, and you can get most of the adaptations that you need from just below with that VO2 max effort.
Yeah, I think Steve Magnus says, rarely go see God, right? Go see God once or twice a year, and that's about it. That's sign for those race days. So we mentioned some of these workouts, and actually, if you're not coached by us, you can download our Zwift workout trainer sampler. We have a link here, and that has some zone 2 tempo, sweet spot, threshold, and VO2 max workouts in that. I think there's only like 30 or 40 workouts in there. You guys can download that. And then, of course, after the main set, you've got the cool down. Again, really go back to just keeping it simple. This could be an easy 1 to 200 yards in the pool. For me, it's usually 50 yards. I'm terrible at cooling down in the pool. The 3 to 5 minute walk at the end of your run, that's super effective. I find that's a really good cool down. And then just, 5 or 10 minutes easy spin as you're getting close to your car or whatever you're outside. Like say, I'm 5 minutes away. Just kick it down into an easy gear. Maybe even do a little bit of high cadence stuff in a super easy gear, but just give yourself 5 or 10 minutes just to cool down. And again, that cool down will really set you up for the recovery from the workout and then really set you up for the next day's workout, which again, for most of our athletes, there's another one coming. Here it goes. You finish this one, but tomorrow, here comes another one. Or later on in the day, you've got to one in the morning. You got doubles today. So cool down to set yourselves up for the next one.
And one thing also that will set you up really, really well to crush your next workout, and think about this as part of your whole interval progression, is these workouts can tax your system a lot more than, say, just a zone 2 one. So you really want to be getting in that fuel as soon as you finish up. And often even during too, you want to be extra intentional with fueling. Just keep in mind that often going super, super hard can suppress appetite a little bit. So that's where you need to plan ahead and be like, my Koya will be in my bag and I'm going to down that in the first 5 minutes. We've talked about that protein shake in the shower situation, anything like that, I think is really, really important. So just kind of build that in as important as the activation and the cool down and the set itself. Make sure that you're fueling super well for any type of interval workouts.
I'm going to shout out here my new favorite, which is Greek yogurt and protein powder and maybe some frozen berries together and smash it all together. I know I'm on that kick big time because, I'm doing some strength work. So I got to get jacked in the gym and come home and do all that stuff. I feel like one of those,
I love that.
I feel like one of those guys in the gym, right? Yeah.
So Jim's gear pick of the week is Greek yogurt.
It's Greek yogurt. Exactly right. And protein powder. Boom. You heard it here, folks. That's your challenge.
Sponsored by Stonyfield.
That's right. Exactly. And that's your challenge of the week too. 50 grams.
Oh yeah.
50 grams of protein, baby, after getting jacked.
That's awesome. All right, so we've done a podcast on top triathlete mistakes, but let's do a quick little riff here on common interval mistakes. What are you seeing your athletes make mistakes with?
Yeah, boy, I see this a lot. And so modifying the intervals is really the one that I see a lot. So if you modify the intervals, you may not get the stimulus or adaptation that you originally intended. So for example, if you have a 2 minutes at 5K run intervals, but then you modify them to say, for example, like, coach, instead of doing the 2 minutes at 5K, I decided to make it, quote, harder, and I'd go half mile at half marathon pace. I'd say, well, guys, like the point was to run at your high end for 2 minutes, and it wasn't. So now you've completely changed the interval and the intention of the workout. So then I go back and say, okay, great, you did that, but now we're going to go back to the 2 minute 5K next week as well. So once you have a plan, just try to stick to your plan. If you've thought through it enough to say, okay, these are the adaptations I'm looking for, then stick to the intervals, because as you change those intervals, it really changes the whole adaptation or the whole complexity or the intention of the workout.
Totally. And it's a fine line. I was saying before, like your body doesn't know the difference between 392 meters and 400 meters, but you don't want to go completely into 800 meters. Like your body actually kind of does know the difference between that. So if you have any questions about the intention of the workout, just ask your coach. We know why that's in there. We've told it to you. But I think trying to execute as close as you can is a good call, and then mash that up with like common sense. Don't run into oncoming traffic because your Garmin told you that you were supposed to do that.
Right. Or if you're feeling sick or something, right? Because obviously we always encourage people to, change your workout if you're sick or you have niggles or something. So of course, change that. But if you're feeling good, like stick with the intervals, because hopefully as coaches, we've thought through this just a little bit, I hope anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would say never make it harder. Like if you want to modify down a little because you're not feeling good, that's fine. But don't take it of your own accord to say like, oh, I'll just do 6 extra ones of these. That's not what we're looking for.
Exactly right. Yes, exactly. So that sort of brings up like also to like, don't bury yourself on the first interval. That's a very common thing to do. Like, oh, coach, I went out really, really hard for the first one, but then I slowed down on all the subsequent ones. I'm like, oh no, that's too bad. So you actually want to do the opposite of that. You want to use the primers will help you hit the first one well, but hit the first one, strong, but then try to finish up fast. So you want to do the opposite of starting strong. You want to finish strong.
Negative splitting is the race strategy too. Being able to kind of get faster over the course of the interval or of the intervals in general is absolutely a great focus.
And the last one here we mentioned is the case of twos, which is too much, too soon, too fast. And again, that's just a recipe for injury.
Yeah. And if you're coaching yourself here and you're listening to this podcast, we've talked a lot about really fun and exciting, kind of sexy, hard workouts. But just keep in mind, you've got to do strides first. You've got to do pickups first. And that's over a period of weeks while you're also supporting it with 80-20 in zone 2. Just listen to all the podcasts and distill all the information and then you'll be fine or ask questions. But yeah, I would never jump into kind of the hardest versions of these workouts because if you don't have the base to support it, that is just a recipe for disaster. And we don't want that in any of our athletes.
So there are, folks. That's the intervals 101. I hope that was helpful. Again, if you guys ever have any questions, just reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you guys and we'd love to hear what you guys are thinking, what you're experiencing. So let us know. But anyway, so that wraps that. And should we go to challenge of the week and gear pick of the week?
I would love to do that. And we were talking at the beginning of the podcast about it sort of being the end of season. Fall is on the horizon. And so I'm going to share an end of season best practice, which is to organize and label all of your tri gear so that you won't lose it when you are waiting until next spring or summer to use it. You will really thank yourself later on so that you don't have to buy a new race belt for the 19th time. Every single year I go through this exercise where I'm like, where is my race belt? They're like $8, but that's a lot of money if every year for the rest of my storied career in athletics, 80 plus years, I need to get another race belt for $8. So I would say just put your race belt and all your other things somewhere organized. I have a little gear closet where all my stuff lives. And I'm going to be organizing that so I'm ready when it's all dusty and I dig it out of the deep winter time and go outside. I'll know where everything is.
Yeah, what is it about race belts? I own so many of them because I always lose them. But then I got smart and I started putting my race belt in my aero helmet. I thought, okay, at least if I'm going for my aero helmet, I'm probably going for my race belt. But yeah, how many race belts do we all own? I don't know. They disappear like socks in the dryer, I guess.
They do.
So anyway, my challenge of the week is sort of similar to this, but end of the season, right? So check out the sale prices on the gear you want for next summer, right? This is a great place to pick up, 30, 40, 50% off gear. So no particular gear here, but I love to watch all the bike kit and sales. So that's what I'm watching for the end of the season. So anyway, challenge of the week is do a little retail therapy.
Get yourself a special treat because that's the best thing that you can do for physical and mental health is a special treat.
Retail therapy always works. It's super sustainable.
Awesome. I just added this to our outline, Jim. I hope it's okay with you. We had a listener a while ago ask us for article/movie/podcast rec of the week. And I did want to share a podcast that I listened to the other day during my run because it's a really, really cool story. So I enjoy the Some Work, All Play podcast. And that's a podcast that's put on by these ultra running coaches, David and Megan Roach. They've been in the ultra space for a really long time. They're out in Boulder. They coach a lot of pros as well as recreational athletes. And I actually worked with Megan through some female athlete research stuff. She's awesome. She's MD, PhD. Anyway, really great people. But they have a podcast recently on David's big win at the Leadville 100 Ultra Marathon. He basically set the course record in that race, which had stood since 2005. He, of course, won the race. And it really shocked the ultra world because it was, first of all, his first 100 miler. He's coached dozens, probably hundreds of athletes, 100 milers, but had never actually done one himself. And a lot of people thought that that record was completely untouchable, that no one was ever going to break this 2005 record. And he did it. And I think the podcast is super interesting because they talk about so many themes that we've actually riffed on a lot, talking about our own lives, our own races, our athletes' races, things like adversity during race week. Their whole family got horrific food poisoning for the whole week leading up to the race. David was in a very serious bike crash back in April, could have died in that. These ups and downs, even really big downs, won't necessarily kill your A race. He had an amazing day, so that was a cool theme to pull out. A second one here was he talks a ton about self-belief. And his wife is also his coach, so Megan coaches him. And she was just so big on like, you're going to do this. I believe in you, that he said that was kind of the difference. There was no question in his mind going into this race that he was going to win the thing and break the course record. And he said that online. It's a really bold thing to do, to go in and say, no, I'm going to break the course record and win it. But he just said, I've heard this before from other pros, you can't let that thought that it won't happen creep into your head. And sometimes it won't happen, and that's okay, but you just have to have that belief juice. So I thought that was really powerful. And then a final point that I thought was really interesting was they talked a lot about quality over quantity training. So he was doing maybe, I think he said like 60-mile run week, 60 to 80 miles. And many people in the ultra space training for 100 milers, like, of course, that's a lot of mileage. But a lot of people are doing 120 miles a week, for example. But he focused on speed and running economy and quality over quantity. And it apparently worked because he won this thing in a really exciting fashion. So anyway, recommend that podcast episode. I'm linking it in the show notes, and they have a fun podcast in general to check out. But yeah, just a really cool story if you like, surprising wins in sports. And coming off my Sea to Summit experience, I was like, wow, this resonates quite a bit.
I was so glad you brought this up because I almost said to you right before we started hit record, I said, we got to figure out some way to work in David Roach's Leadville 100 run, because what's cool about this and sort of what we all started doing this podcast and what they do in their podcast is they're just giving away information. Like, here it is, folks. There are no secrets. We learned this from somebody. We experiment on ourselves. We experiment on our athletes. Here's what we've learned. Go forth and try it out yourself. And so I have been religiously reading David's tweets. He's been taking questions from all kinds of people. So he's talked about sodium bicarbonate in his last one this morning, about downhill running, high-carb fueling, because he was pushing 120 grams per hour, talking about super shoes, post-exercise, ketones, my anti-pick of the week from last week, iron. But anyway, just it's worth listening to the podcast, jumping on David's Twitter. And for many, many, many years, I have always read everything that David wrote in Trail Runner for a running magazine. So he's just a great, great guy. I couldn't have him a better person. And what a really cool thing that those guys pulled off together as a team. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
Totally. Yeah. So we recommend their podcast. We rarely recommend other podcasts on this podcast, but I think that's one that we can probably recommend to our listeners, especially the Leadville story. Okay. Well, I think that takes us to our favorite closing segment, Gear Pick of the Week. I am going to recommend fins. We haven't even talked about fins that much on this podcast, but I'm talking about swimming fins. And fins are an awesome tool that you can use in the pool for lots of different drills. It's endless entertainment, I would find. And the great thing about fins is you go really, really fast in the pool when you have fins. And so for me, when I'm not feeling motivated to get in the pool, I'll go do a set with fins because it's just so fun and you feel really fast. And it's actually forcing you to have good body position, a good kick, really feel the water a little bit better. Or if you have trouble kind of balancing your body, I think fins is a great way to do that. So I do that a lot with some of my athletes. So I'm linking the specific fins that I use. They're sort of long floating fins. And yeah, if you're ever not feeling motivated to get in the pool, do a paddles and fins workout and you will be flying and feel like Katie Ledecky. And it's just a really nice thing to do for people that don't love the pool like me.
I chuckled so much when I saw that this was your pick of the week because I saw this Instagram reel this week of a swim coach, and he's like, oh, here are fins, and what are fins all about? And he holds up the long fins. He goes, hey, for the beginner swimmer, you should use the long fins because it helps keep you up and you go fast. And then he pulls the small fins out and he goes, and if you're an experienced swimmer, you should use the short fins. And I'm like, wait a minute. Katie Clayton always uses the long fins. And if you have swum, folks, with Katie Clayton, you'll know that during her warm-ups, she can knock off like a 115, 100 with those long fins on. So we start the swim warm up and kind of side by side. Then Katie puts the fins on. Like, well, she's gonna be done 5 minutes before I am. So
I thought that you knew that, Jim. I thought you knew that the long fins are so much faster and more powerful. And I was like, why the hell is he choosing the short fins? Like, that's a handicap.
It's a handicap. So
you might as well put a cement block on your back and just swim next to me and see how it goes.
Get out at that point, honestly, right? Yeah, exactly. I'm done. I'm out. So anyway, yeah.
Here's the thing. We always say with swimming, getting wet is the win. So if the way to do that is to wear the long beginner fins that are also used by snorkelers and that are also used by scuba divers, that's completely fine with me as a coach. I still think it helps with technique. And I was talking before about my go-to swim session on a Monday, which is a tech swim. I will say a couple people have remarked to me before that my splits on Strava look pretty fast for that. It's because there's a lot of fins. It's not because I'm going fast. It's because I'm swimming with fins because my goal is to get wet and to practice technique. So probably at least 30% of that workout, I have a lot of fins on.
Well, we're practicing honesty right now. So I did a lot of race sim shorts this year, which I swore off for many years. I wore for many years, and then I had a coach say, hey, dummy, get a real swimsuit. I'm like, I don't even own a real swimsuit, so I had to go buy one. So I swam with that for many years. But this year, coming back from injury, I did put the race sim on. And I just, like you say, it got me to the pool, and I realized, okay, this needs to be the most low stress thing. I just need to get to the pool. I need to get in the water, what method will take to get me there, whether it's long fins or short fins or a wetsuit or sim shorts, whatever it is, or paddles. Just, bring your toys and get in the water, and that's the win.
And once again, we're recreational athletes. Like, we can sort of do whatever we want. And if I really wanted to eke out the best performances for me ever in every sport, I would probably swim more and I'd probably do less with fins. But at the end of the day, I'm here for fun, and I am in my fuck around and find out era. So we're going to see how much fin swimming we can do for the rest of the year. And hopefully that will set me up well to be fine in 2020.
It's going to be awesome. It's going to come out great. So it's time in the water. So, okay, my gear pick of the week, it's a bit different. It's the Peacock subscription, because I watched some of the Olympics, and of course I watched all the Tour de France, the men's, and then I watched the women's, and the women's Tour de France was unbelievable this year. You guys have to watch it. And now the Volta a España is on, and of course it's, The Office as well. So anyway, if you're looking for fall, winter inspiration, you got to go with the Peacock subscription. And I want to give a special shout out for the Tour de France women's version, which was just unbelievable race, and everybody has to watch that this winter.
Oh, that's so awesome. And I did get a Peacock subscription. I laughed when I saw this in the outline because I got one right before the Olympics. And as I was putting my credit card information to pay like the $7 a month that it is to have Peacock, I was like, I am never going to cancel this. Like, in my head, I was like, oh, well, I'll just cancel it after the Olympics. And I put my credit card in, and I was like, I'm signing up for 12 months and a lifetime of Peacock. And I don't even regret it, because that's what we'll do. When it's cold and dark in the trainer, we're going to watch the Tour de France Femmes, and we're going to watch people win the Olympics, and it's going to be awesome.
And you get to see Ron Swanson in Parks and Rec. So all kinds of perks. So anyway, yeah.
Endless entertainment. Yeah. Love it. Oh, well, this has been such a fun episode. We're excited to just keep it rolling kind of through the off season. We've got a bunch of people that are doing run races. I have a couple more athletes doing triathlons. Even things like 70.3 Worlds are coming up around the corner. So there's going to be content. Don't fear as we approach 1 year of the podcast. We still have a couple months till we get there, but it's been awesome. And we're just so grateful for our listener community. So thanks so much for listening. And I guess we'll catch you all next time.
Thanks, peeps.